Hello and greetings. Welcome back. We today um, began our travelogue, as it were, through the content of the course. We are now, past the uh, two first chapters there, where we're kind of setting the stage and the terminology of the course. And today we're going to begin across the Atlantic, and we are going to be working our way east for the first several weeks. And as I said last time, we'll drop down south and make our way uh, the home stretch of the course uh, into the Western Hemisphere and finish up here in North America. So as we're traveling east across the Atlantic, we are going to be um, hitting Europe. Hitting Europe. I was looking at a graphic recently, and it looks like I think 60, it was a voting graphic, 67, 68% of voters today of are white. And so, I don't know what percentage, but probably 90% of that would constitute folks that have lineage and ancestry in Europe. That 67, 68% is down quite considerably from where it was 30, 40 years ago. But nevertheless, most of us watching this video will I'll be talking about some of the culture groups, and we'll be able to relate that. Yeah, hey, rumor has it that the the Celts are where my family tree began. I've never been really good at determining those things, primarily because I've heard probably a half dozen stories about where my lineage is from. So I don't know. I'm not sure about mine. But so you will get into the rhythm of things here. You get your lecture models out, and we will talk about. So I can get this thing. There we go. Where we want to go with this, and some of the major heads-up terms, and we'll hit the ground, right? Hit the ground running. Europe. We want to recognize the role of capitalism, right? We've heard a lot about that economic system. We want to recognize the role of that in Europe's rise to global dominance. We want to understand the influence of the Cold War on Europe's political and geographic formation. For those of us old enough to remember that, that was a real big deal, the Cold War. And it still has a good deal of influence on the world today as we know it. And I want to trace Europe's cultural roots. Maybe I should have had that first, because that's where I'm going to head first. So some of the major heads-up terms here. Capitalism, probably already addressed this once already, but this is where individuals and corporations own and keep their profits, right? They come to agreements on prices and what gets produced. Imperialism, this is the conquering of cultures. The Industrial Revolution, agriculture to industry, beginning in Great Britain. Nation state, the nation state ideal. This is all about sovereignty, all about sovereignty. Genocide, right? Ugly thing there, the extermination of people. Democratic centralization, communism. fancier way of saying communism, or a technical way of talking about communism. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, talked about that a little bit early already. That was the military organization from the free West, the democratic West, Western Europe, Canada, the US, to check any Soviet advances. The European Union, the EU, basically about promoting peace, European values, and the well-being of European citizens. See, where do I want to go next with this? Devolution. This is less government. Less government. People desire less government interference, I guess, from national governments. Euro regions, kind of a cool concept that over time you have border regions. So let's take, for example, Germany and France, where folks live just a few miles from the border. In the past, it was almost impossible to go do business crossing the boundaries. And you may have been a lot closer to the boundary of France if you were in Germany than you were to the nearest markets in Germany, but it was tough to do. Euro regions made that easier. Agglomeration economies. This is where the smart thing to do. The goal is to invest where facilities and markets are already a reality, right? Don't go recreating the wheel. Another way of saying that. Deindustrialization. That's the fall off of manufacturing. Okay, extensification. Produce less from same area. Produce less from the same area. Guest workers, we'll talk about that. Guest workers. Foreigners coming over to work in Europe, but with a set timetable of when they must leave and go back home. The Velvet Divorce and the Velvet Revolution. I have kind of a thing for Yugoslavia, teaching it. I don't have any emotional ties to anything there, but just teaching about that soap opera of events with the formation of Yugoslavia and its dissolving in the early 90s. Well, when Yugoslavia dissolved, there was a peaceful revolution, peaceful divorce from the entities that it contained. More on that, believe me, coming up. And then we have last thing, the Westphalian system, right? Westphalian system up here. Westphalian system still in existence today, but it basically in the 17th century in Europe ended religious wars. People were, killing themselves over, things like religion and politics, invading other people's lands, people's boundaries over these types of things. And, cooler heads prevailed. International dialogue in 1600s, basically saying we got to stop doing this. We got to start recognizing each other's borders, hence the Westphalian system. So let's get down to it. We got some notes right off the bat here. Let me just say this before I get into the notes, just a little setup here. I'm thinking here I should do this. Turn to page 86. 86 will open you up to Europe for you visual type learners, and 87 and 88 give you some maps of Europe. So as you're doing that, I'll just start setting everything up here, set the table. The origins of modern globalization can be traced back to the emergence of Europe as a global power in the 15th and 16th centuries. Through technical advances and political conquest, Europeans laid the foundation for the political, economic, and cultural interconnection, really, that exists today throughout the world. And again, looking at your maps now on page 88 and 89, there are 4 distinct subregions within Europe. You have Western Europe, Northern Mediterranean, and East Central. The industrial countries of Western Europe are largely responsible for Europe's emergence as a global leader, while Northern Europe has a high standard of living, despite having a relatively harsh environment. Mediterranean Europe is noteworthy for its distinct climate and early influence of the Greek and Roman civilizations. And then there's East Central Europe. That continues in some part its integration with the rest of the region as they're a post-communist political identity and an economic identity as well with the communists. And its integration with the rest of the region as this post-communist political economic identity continues to evolve. So those smaller than many of the other regions that are described in this book, Europe's nonetheless a complex region. Politically, Europe is divided into 38 countries, including 5 microstates. Some of the smallest countries in the world contained. European political boundaries have been drawn and redrawn numerous times throughout history, and it's a process that continues into the 21st century as well. Key elements in the modern world emerged from Europe, including capitalism, the Industrial Revolution, and nation states. Let's take a look at this. European influences and diversity, conflict, technological innovation. The migration of peoples. And you have some notes here. I'll talk through it. And you can write it before I say it or after, whatever works for you. Culture groups. You have the Greeks, the early groups, the Greeks, the Celts, and the Romans. The Greeks inhabited only the southwest corner of Europe, established by 1000 BC. The Celts, Central and Western Europe, remnants of language and culture, the Welsh, the Scots, and the Irish. And then you have the Germanic and Slavic peoples a little bit later, right? The Germanic and Slavic peoples, that would include the Vikings. They moved north into Scandinavia as a seafaring and maritime people. The Slavs, they basically settled into the middle of modern, what would be today modern Germany, and as far south as the Adriatic Sea. You can see that in your maps, and even into the Balkans. The rise of European global power. Capitalism. Capitalism is the practice of individual corporations owning business and keeping profits. Its origins are in the Mediterranean area and Western Europe. I would say safe to say between the 12th and 15th centuries, the Phoenicians, who are not European, they began dominating the Mediterranean region. So probably the beginnings of capitalism, maybe it was arguably there. They specialized in glass and dye making. So you could say maybe the origins were there of capitalism. But as far as the Europeans go, the Portuguese began capturing slaves, right, for expeditions. The Spanish then followed suit, and both began this era of what we know as colonialism, right? Colonialism and then imperialism, which is the conquering and crushing of cultures, just radically altering their economies. Then in the 1520s, maybe a second wave of the Protestant Reformation, which begins under Martin Luther, another big name that maybe second wave's not the way to say it, but John Calvin. John Calvin was a contemporary. That's why I don't want to say a second wave. John Calvin was a contemporary of Martin Luther. In fact, he and Luther would get together and discuss, where are we going to go with this, this Protestant Reformation revolution, doctrinal revolution. Where are we going to go with this? John Calvin came out of Zurich, Switzerland, and John Calvin and the Calvinists in Zurich, I think, could be held highly influential when it comes to the spread of capitalism. The Protestant Reformation in Zurich saw the views of Calvin promote things like capitalist development via the teachings that you must work hard, right? A biblical edict, right? Of working, hard work, and that one must handle God's money wisely, these types of things. And this was also in accordance with the doctrine of predestination. Predestination basically interpreted the scripture, that doctrine that, well, you really can't know where you're going when you die. You can only know that by how you behave. So, if you're not handling your money right, you're not working hard, you could, you sit on your porch swing and ponder that and maybe deduct that you're on your way to hell, right? So there was a motivating factor for hard work and frugality. And so, yes, capitalism finds at least some of its roots in out of the Protestant Reformation in Zurich, Switzerland. So all of this leads to, in time, the Industrial Revolution, right? The Industrial Revolution begins in Great Britain, circa 1830s, spreads across the English Channel into the European continent. Page 113, figure 424 will help visualize some of what I'm talking about here. This leads to the modern countries, the nation state, the Westphalian system, right? That led an international system of religious toleration and international dialogue, still referred to today, and it leads to the nation state. Again, basically, you are respecting what is going on in someone else's political boundaries. You just can't go storming in there because someone believes something different, right? Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, he is, to some Americans, maybe many Americans, he's been up to some alarming things up there over the past several years since COVID, putting people in jail for what they've been saying or what they've been doing, like certain pastors keeping churches open during COVID. We can't go up there, no matter how alarmed some people may be. We can't go up there and whisk Prime Minister Trudeau out of Ottawa, right? Even though I'm talking about North America, that wasn't an issue here. These are the kind of things that were happening in Europe, and cooler heads prevailed, and can't do this anymore. And like I said, they were having religious wars over this type of stuff. So basically, a nation state ideal, what is it? Well, each state should be free to govern oneself and only as its own country, right? So the ideal of the nation state, countries with common characteristics, was fully realized through the French Revolution in the early 19th century, late 18th century, early 19th century, and ultimately through Napoleon. And the state, through this time, the state was, trying to think of a way to say this here, providing an efficient form of government. It provided an efficient form of government. It still does, right? It still does. But here's the thing. This is kind of where I'm going with this. Kind of got to, find a balance in life, right? It's tough to do. As efficient as a form of government that the nation state provided, nationalism grew in Europe. There's nothing wrong with nationalism, right? The state, though, became intolerant in some cases, right? And this kind of culminates in some genocides, right? We know about the extermination of millions of Jews between 1935 and 1945. Even earlier than that, one you don't hear about, 1.2 million Christians were exterminated at the hands of the Turkish government in the early 20s. Just before we get into Europe after 1945, I just want to say something about the climate in Europe. And as I'm doing this, you can page through pages 97 to 103. There's some climate maps there. Europe has a mid-latitude West Coast climate. North Atlantic drift currents bring warm ocean waters across the North Atlantic from a Gulf Stream. Venice is an architectural treasure. In Italy, it's gradually subsiding because of frequent high tides. There's a lot of geologic variety in Europe in the form of rivers, right? The Rhine River, right? The Rhine out of the Netherlands and in the Liechtenstein is the second largest river in Europe and the busiest. And the busiest 10,000 ships a day, right, are seen on that river. Europe has long coastlines and navigable rivers. And that's significant to movement, right? One of the themes of geography. You have the Rhine, you have the Elbe, the Danube rivers out of Bulgaria and Romania, and the Elbe from the North European plain into places like Prague. You have the Seine River in France, the River Thames in Italy, or in England, I'm sorry. Right, so one of major rivers. Europe after 1945. Europe after 1945. As we know, 1945, World War II ends, right? Shooting stops there. The communists argued for democratic centralism. Joseph Stalin and the Russians, right? They argue for democratic centralism, and they believe that the communists were the party of the working class, right? Of the working class. And they felt that they were the only true representatives with the right to govern, which leads to the formation of NATO and the European Union. NATO was created in 1949 to counter the Soviets. There was a lot of bellicose rhetoric coming out of Moscow in the years following World War II. And it was not nice toward democracies and the capitalists. And it hinted that perhaps there would be some picking off of territory adjacent to the Soviet Union, right? So the Soviets are now a partner with NATO, but they're not a member. After the 1991 collapse, they became of the Soviet Union. They became a partner. You can look at page 120, figure 4.3, in regard to this. Now, about NATO and about the Soviet Union, Russia is resentful about NATO's move toward the Soviet border, toward the former Soviet, toward the Russian border. A lot of former Soviet countries are now part of NATO, a further issue that gets folks like Vladimir Putin very nervous. Ukrainian membership, right? Ukrainian membership is a major concern to Russia. I personally don't see that happening in the near future. But the Ukrainians have been courted, right? And they're right up on the Russian border. So that's part and parcel why that war is ongoing over there. There's some other things too, which I'll get to once we get to Russia, right? Or once we get to that region. So the EU, the European Union, formerly the EEC, the European Economic Community, was developed in the 1970s, investing large sums of cash to improve infrastructure of the lagging regions. Right after World War II, completely demolished a lot of places. One of the things I believe governments in Western Europe were afraid of was maybe the communists playing off that discontent of trying to rebuild. Supranationalism is where differing nations cooperate for mutual benefit. Same policies, military. For example, the European Union was set up just to do that, right? Promote peace, values, same values for Europe, and the well-being of its citizens. Evolution. Evolution within European countries. Basically, locals were looking for less rule from their national governments. This was emblemized by Brexit. Brexit over in England over the past several years. And I want to break this down. Brexit, probably one of my favorite themes when covering Europe. Right. So what happened at Brexit? I mean, if you hear about Brexit, you hear about it in a broad way. I want to break down what I am pretty convinced happened over there. But it emblemizes devolution, the idea that folks want less from their national governments. Well, what happened in England was the English wanted less from the European Union, hence the break off. So basically, Brexit was scheduled for June of 2016. Proponents who wanted to break away from the European Union, they campaigned trade deals that Britain could not negotiate independently. And they felt, they would be able to write it, Britain would be able to write its own laws as a result and get away from regulations, European Union dictates. And this was the big one, I believe, here. I would strongly argue this: reduce the number of migrants coming into England. And I think that was the big elephant in the room. I really do. And it was not without evidence, too, in an uptick of terror activity and violations against British women from outsiders coming in to awful things were going on. So, but here's the thing, the drama the drama just kept mounting. Right up until the referendum, the people who wanted to remain in the European Union, the Remain camp, I call them, they actually looked to be the winner. But when the actual numbers, the night those votes were counted, 52% of the voters opted to depart from the European Union. David Cameron, Prime Minister, he resigned the very next day. And here's what's interesting too. The referendum broke on, it did, it broke on two things, geographic and age factors. Aside from London, right, and some urban areas, the rural areas, especially the farther north you went, sentiment for making the break was stronger, right? Sentiment was making the break was stronger. So what was interesting too is Brexit kind of revealed a generation gap, the way I look at it. A recent study showed that 69% of those under 35 voted to remain. They voted to remain with the European Union, while those 45 and older voted 56% to leave. Aside from the terror aspect, which I think was the big elephant in the room, the Remain folks were, one of our big arguments was about trade deals. It's going to hurt the country with trade deals. And the older generation, they tended to maybe bristle at some of those arguments. And you could argue, the older generation, they'd been around a while. They'd seen maybe what was working and what didn't, right? So, but yeah, this definitely, Brexit definitely revealed a generation gap. Euro regions, cool concept. I said that at the beginning of all this. Folks on the borders look to make border crossing easier and being able to do general business easier. We get back to devolution too, in connection with Brexit. In Scotland, right? In Scotland, just north of England, part of the United Kingdom, they look to do their own business up there agriculturally. They have their own education system, healthcare system. They want to be able to, have their own taxation codes and lawmaking functions. When you equate a Scot with being British, they will bristle at you. Now, there was a referendum there too, back around the same time, 2000, mid-2000s, if Scotland wanted to break off from England, and to my surprise, they opted to stay. Population patterns in Europe. Population patterns. The dynamics there. Population dynamics. Zero population growth, right? Zero population growth. Low birth rates. Low birth rates. Mediterranean and East Central European countries have had decreases in population growth. There have been small increases in the West and North. Some of the changes in Europe's economic geography. Agglomeration economies. This is the idea that you invest in production facilities that already have been established with a proven labor force. There's deindustrialization that's been ongoing. Manufacturing jobs fell off. Factory jobs became defunct in the older areas. And I would say this too, the shift has been to of course, a industrialized economy there. So you're kind of looking at high-tech goods, expensive luxury goods, like automobiles and watches, and that tertiary sector, the upper echelons of the service sector, entertainment, government, healthcare, financial services, education, and retail sales. And if you want to look at a visual breakdown of this too, in your textbooks, page 114, figure 426 will be good in that regard. The countries of Western Europe, the countries of Western Europe. Western Europe, but well, before we get to the countries, I just a little set of notes here. Western Europe has been a hub for human rights organizations like many that we have heard of, right? Red Cross out of Switzerland, the Geneva Convention, right? The Geneva Convention developed in 1864. That's also out of Switzerland. John Calvin's hometown, right? Mentioned those guys earlier. And basically, and then you had the Hague, which is in the Netherlands. That's an international court of justice, and they assess responsibility to war criminals. Let's take a look at these countries in Western Europe. So keep that up there. France and the UK, right? The United Kingdom made up of England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and you can see figure 433 on page 124 to see this subsection of Europe. Yeah, the French and the United Kingdom. France became a nation state in 1789 after the French Revolution. Centralized government decisions made from Paris. Page 131, figure 438 adds a visual to that as well. Pardon me. And I mentioned the visuals, and I realize time comes at a premium, but you'd be surprised if you're not aware of this already, how much the visuals and so forth enhance the learning, and certainly help in getting those really good grades on quizzes and discussion questions. In the United Kingdom, you have Northern Ireland, right? The Irish, with the Irish nationalism versus the loyalists, right? Nationalists want all of Ireland united, kicking the British out. And as I said, the Scottish pride, right? Scottish pride, they bristle too when asked if they are British. Both countries are imperialists and colonizers, or were, although withdrawing from most of their colonies by the 1950s, early 60s. But they remain, even though they did that, they still remain very much involved with those countries as well. Then you got the Low Countries, right? The Low Countries are Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, right? Otherwise known as the Benelux countries. Right? Belgium, BE for Belgium, NEL for the Netherlands, and the UX for Luxembourg. Page, I guess I'm not going to go anywhere with that one there. Benelux. Then you got the Alpine countries, right? The Alpine countries, Austria, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein, one of the very smallest countries in the world. It's about 62 square miles, right? Landlocked. Yeah, I think it's the jogging my memory here. I think it's the fourth largest or fourth smallest country. I'm sorry, fourth smallest country in the world. Austria and all these began as dynasties, right? Began as dynasties. Austria grew into one of Europe's largest dynasties, the Habsburgs, the Habsburg family. Modern Austria has most of the German-speaking regions of the former empire before World War I. The Swiss are made up of 26 cantons, they're like little counties. Power comes from those local cantons. The Economic Freedom Index, which your term paper will revolve around. Switzerland is always near the top because it's pretty much governed by these local cantons who arguably know what's best for their citizenry, and they've been pretty good at keeping the central government out of their hair, and it's probably not a secret why the economy has run fairly well over the years in Switzerland. And then you have Germany. Germany is made up of 16 provinces. Right? Europe's most dominant country, most populist. Okay, most populous country in Europe. Strongest economy in Europe. In fact, fifth largest economy in the world. And a leading financer of the European Union. And people, ethnicity, and culture, immigrant workers, guest workers who could stay as long as the work was available, but would always be foreigners expected to go home. And there's also some concern with Muslim terror in Europe as a result of the guest worker programs. And finally, an interesting topic for me, and that's Yugoslavia. You can turn to page 140, figure 449. Keep one eye on this as it's humanly possible as you look at the notes. But yeah, try to keep some glances at this because as you'll see, this is kind of very soap opera like. So it's best to maybe keep an eye on the various countries that became a part of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia, you don't have to write this down, but Yugoslavia, really the idea of it comes from the pinheads who were managing World War I. And I think I'll save that part until the notes here. Yeah, I could segue into that better. Serbia and Montenegro, you could spot them on the map. Serbia and Montenegro were independent prior to World War I. Both achieved territory during the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913. The Slovenes and the Croats lost independence way back in the Middle Ages and were now a part of Austria-Hungary. Figure A. Figure A, maybe over on page 139, figure A, you could see Austria-Hungary. So they lost, they were now part of Austria-Hungary, the Slovenes and Croats. Late 1800s, the Serbians looked to take territory in Austria-Hungary. contain fellow Slavic peoples. The Serbs were also upset that Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1908, because that had a lot of their Serbian Slavic cousins in it. So in 1914, the Serb nationalists assassinated Austria-Hungary's Archduke in Sarajevo. In 1919, Yugoslavia came into existence, the Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes included. So just taking a break right there, what happened was 1918, World War I ends, but, the powers that be were looking at how this all started. And it all started, World War I mushroomed because of this ethnic tension, right? The Archduke's assassination really sets off World War I. So guys like our president, Woodrow Wilson, and other kind of administrators on steroids who ran countries thought, well, we can't have this happen again. So they put all these warring countries, these countries that hated each other, into a pot of, a land pot, and felt, it'd be easy to monitor the hatreds. Hence, Yugoslavia, right, is formed. Well, there's problems with that, though, right? There's problems with that. 1929, officially dubbed Yugoslavia. Slovenes and Croats are Roman Catholics. The Serbs, the Macedonians, Bulgarians are Eastern Orthodox. So you got a problem there. Well, after World War II, the communists take over, right? The communists take over, and they gain control. So they suppress any kind of nationalism. They promoted Tito to govern the area, and Tito effectively promotes the Yugoslavia idea with the communists in charge. So, of course, with the communists, that was always in order to get people looking to the government for answers, not their own national identities. The Soviets, the communists were not into national identities, right? They wanted you looking to them. So they would suppress dissent. So the old resentments resurfaced once Tito died, and once the communist bloc dissolved in 1991, after early 1992, when the Soviet Union collapsed. In 1991, Slovenia and Croatia declared independence once the Soviet bloc dissolved, and they were able to do this peacefully, otherwise known as the Velvet Revolution, right? It was and the Velvet Divorce. Very peaceful exits to independence. Belgrade, the capital, Yugoslavia, of course, looked to prevent this from happening, but there was no bloodshed. Belgrade, the capital of Serbia, they helped the Serbs in Croatia in an attempt to establish their own country. Bosnia-Herzegovina began to move toward independence, but they were split between Muslims, Serbs, and Croats. So they all wanted independence. They all wanted independence, and all chaos broke loose. This was 1995. The Dayton Peace Accords looked to divide this all up. Macedonia was left landlocked, which is a problem because it's very poor. That's probably why the Serbs did not come after it. The Serbs were going after a lot of people. 20% of this area was Albanian, and they looked to get their own territory. Serbs were the majority of Yugoslavia, who came to view money as being wasted by the minority groups. Slobodan Milosevic came to power in Serbia as a result, and he began a campaign of ethnic cleansing of folks who were not Slavic or Serbian. Finally, he was put in prison in The Hague. We looked at The Hague earlier, in the Netherlands, for war crimes. He died in jail awaiting the War Crimes Tribunal. And a term for all of this was the Balkanization of the region, dubbed after the Balkan Mountains, which cut down through Serbia and into the sea. So if you have your graphic organizer, you can get that out, and we'll take a look here at what we've covered. Today we looked at Europe, the culture groups, the Greeks, the Romans, and the Celts, and a little later, the Vikes and the Slavic peoples. The rise of Europe through capitalism, the Portuguese and the slave trade, setting up colonies, and colonialism. Now, I don't have it here. I should. Capitalism from the Protestant Reformation. You might want to jot that in there. You visual types who benefit from these graphic organizers. Protestant Reformation in Geneva, Switzerland. John Calvin, his teaching on predestination, hard work, handling money right, be a good sign that maybe you're going to heaven, right? Predestination. After a modern nation, Europe becomes a modern nation via the Westphalian system, basically promoting international dialogue to settle differences and to not eliminate each other over how people think and go about things in that regard. It recognizes national sovereignty. The nation state ideal is a good way to do government. However, man is the way he is. He finds a way maybe to screw things up. Nationalism grows, and you have genocides. Germans against the Jews, the Turks against Christians. After World War II, the Iron Curtain comes down across Europe, right? Winston Churchill's apt description of the ideological divide upon Europe. You have the communists in Eastern Europe and the democratic governments in the West. The Iron Curtain, supranational organizations are set up like NATO, the European Union, and the United Nations to check any communist advances. The communists fall at the Soviet Union dissolves last day of 1991. And then it's got a whole new world, right? Whole new world. You have a lot of people wanting less to do with their central governments, the process of devolution. Europe becomes a region of zero population growth, a lot of low birth rates. Euro region set up to make people be able to do business easier in the border regions. And then Yugoslavia, right? You could look at that yourself. We'll go over that. The soap opera with that region. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is what is up ahead for us this week. And at this point, you guys are getting the rhythm of some of this, most of it. Got a couple new wrinkles in here this week, though. Reading, I have a reading for you, pages 94 to 95 about nationalism, the nation state, and populism. This would go well with maybe addressing your discussion question. That will please me if that is added. For the discussion questions as well, coming up at the end of the week. Due Friday night, the initial posts, 2 response posts due on Saturday. In the news, again, got several options there. Just pick one, write on it. Okay. And see what else we got there. Topic submissions. Yeah, topic submissions are due on Wednesday. Remember the topics, you're picking a country, look at the chart, see if a country's been taken, and let me know, right? So I can document it, which country you're going to choose to do for your paper. And then Monday, 12:01, we have a quiz on Europe. Okay. As always, questions, comments, concerns, call me, write me, please. And I'll get on that right away. So until next time. Bye-bye.